Research using man's best friend has led to advances in medicine. But many people, including animal rights activists, don't think pets should end their days in research labs. Hello and welcome to another edition of DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. Today we'll take a look at how medical research on animals has helped people with disabilities. And we'll meet people who say such research is unnecessary.
Are you disabled and looking for work? Later we'll bring you some job hunting tips.
And we'll meet Catherine Steele. She has cerebral palsy, and she's just graduated with a Ph.D. in biostatistics. For her, a dream come true. But first, here's this week's roundup of disability news.
People with disabilities are vitally interested in medical research, one of the most controversial aspects of which is the use of animals. In Ontario, under provincial law, pound animals scheduled to be euthanized must be made available for research, and that has pet owners upset. But there are more sides to this complex issue. Recently in Oshawa, Ontario, City Council voted to restrict the use of pound dogs by medical laboratories. The dogs are used in research, and to the animal rights movement, the decision by Oshawa Council is a victory at the grassroots level. A victory which is gaining acceptance across North America. At stake is the use of animals, specifically from pounds, to develop new drugs and surgical procedures. Researchers like Dr. Jim Kenyon, Director of Veterinary Services at Toronto Hospital, says animals are fundamental to that research and that cell cultures and computer models cannot replicate the results. The research done at Toronto Hospital is responsible for developments such as the heart pacemaker and the double lung transplant. Ann Harrison, as the world's first double lung transplant recipient, is a beneficiary of that research. Harrison says she is a dog lover, but when she spoke at the council meeting in Oshawa, her message was unequivocal.
I can tell you right now, I would not be alive today if it wasn't for the dogs that were used in experimentation for the double lung transplant.
The double lung transplant was developed at Toronto Hospital and first tested on animals. Kathleen Hunter of the Toronto Humane Society says that the medical community needs to break away from its current model of research based on the use of animals.
We should stop those kinds of invasive techniques where there are known alternatives at this moment in time, and there are many, many of those. There's very little incentive for researchers to do anything about using the alternatives. They're trained in the procedures that they use now. They've got labs full of animals. They've got technicians. They know exactly what they're doing. They've been doing it for 40 or 50 years. We've got to convince them, or somebody's got to convince them, either by legislation or by financial incentives, to try some other ways.
Later on in the program, we'll bring you a more extensive report on animal research.
A drug that is reported to have cured people with AIDS in Africa is being tried on patients in Toronto. Interferon alpha, tried before in massive doses, is now being used in doses 1 million times smaller.
Let's have a look at the back of your throat.
Jim Gaylord has AIDS.
Just take your time over one side of your mouth.
Gaylord has volunteered to try a low dose of the drug interferon alpha in hopes that it just may be a cure for the deadly virus that's been stalking his body for more than 2 years.
Sounds just fine.
Corner of my mind says, oh God, it would be really nice that if this would work.
A study done in Kenya shows that 99 out of 101 people who tried the drug showed dramatic increases in what doctors call their CD4 counts, a measure of how well an AIDS patient is doing. The same study also found an astonishing 10% of participants lost all their HIV antibodies, an indication that they no longer carried the AIDS virus. This latest interferon research has something of a controversial background to it. It involves cows. A veterinarian researcher in Amarillo, Texas, found that low doses of interferon showed signs of curing cows, poultry, and pigs of certain viral infections.
We've had a lot of false hopes, and this one is such an extravagant hope.
Dr. Michael Halton is coordinating the 8-week interferon trial here in Toronto. He and other AIDS specialists don't exactly know how it works, but he says doctors and people with AIDS have nothing to lose.
But just because we can't see how it works doesn't mean it's not worth trying.
Let it dissolve in your mouth and then swallow.
Gaylord doesn't expect interferon to cure him, but he hasn't given up hope.
If you want to participate in the trial, you need to sign right here. Okay.
Regina Hickel-Sabo, CBC News, Toronto.
A new type of helmet designed to protect children with balance or seizure problems is meeting with approval and acceptance from the children. The headgear, which resembles a hockey helmet, was developed at the Hugh Macmillan Centre in Toronto. Its similarity to athletic headgear means easier peer acceptance, and the cost, estimated at around $550, is half the price of a custom-fitted helmet.
And that's this week's roundup of disability news.
Coming up, should stray dogs be used for medical research? As we heard earlier in the news, animal rights activists in Ontario have been trying to stop the flow of dogs from pounds and shelters to research labs. The Provincial Animals for Research Act requires that pounds and shelters either find homes for stray animals, keep them indefinitely, or release them to research labs rather than killing them. Animal research plays a large part in the development of groundbreaking medical procedures. Dr. Jim Kenyon is the Director of Veterinary Services at the Toronto Hospital. The main thrust of his work is experimental surgery for heart and lung diseases and disabilities. The work he's been able to do with the help of animals has made the Toronto General the only center in the world that can do double lung transplants.
Toronto General was the first center in the world to do a single lung transplant. Last year we did 43, and it's in more common use around the world now. We are also the only center in the world now doing double lung transplants, and I don't have an exact number, but we have done a number of those. We have survivors up to a number of years. That has direct implications for cystic fibrosis and other types of congenital lung problems, inelasticity and this sort of thing. Toronto General also was the first coronary care unit in the world, and it was the first place to develop the cardiac pacemaker. Although the first human implant was in Stockholm, it was developed in Toronto. So we're looking at developing new types of pacemakers, new types of valve replacements. We have one project that's looking at developing very small artificial vessels. Common right now to put artificial vessels into the main vessels of the lower leg and this sort of thing. What we're looking at is bringing that down in size so that you could actually replace coronary vessels. Another project right now is looking at ischemic injury or lack of blood supply injury to muscle mass. Now that can be anything from a crush injury to more commonly throwing an embolism. Someone older or bedridden, handicapped who might be prone to this. We're developing techniques that will allow us to treat that muscle rather than simply reestablish blood flow, of which we can do easily, but with relatively poor success in many cases. We're perfecting techniques now which will allow us to end up with a patient with a limb as opposed to a patient without a leg.
Would those techniques been possible to perfect without using animals?
No, absolutely not. There is a great deal of, for instance, the muscle ischemia project, there is a great deal of biochemical work, there's a lot of computer modeling. That particular project doesn't require tissue culture, but there's a lot of lab work. But the basic data and the basic material for that analysis still has to come from the dog. It's by far the best method, best model.
Recently in Oshawa, Ontario, City Council blocked the usage of dogs in a municipal pound for research purposes. How does that affect your facility here?
Well, it's going to impact very directly. About 10% of our dogs came out of Oshawa last year. Our specific projects require large dogs, so it's not every municipality that we can go to or every dog that, from any municipality. They're very specific animals, and the number of that particular type of animal coming out of Oshawa is significant. Several projects, the one project looking at electrical activity of the heart and the other one involving the mobility, the muscle ischemia and muscle loss and the possibility of amputations. Those two projects in particular use a lot of Oshawa dogs. They will be directly affected. The cardiac one in particular may in fact fold just because we can't get the dogs and we can't produce the work, therefore the grant will probably have to be returned. The other project which is most directly affected is the double lung transplant program, which is still, we've got a few bugs to iron out and a few new drugs. As you know, some of the drugs, cyclosporin and such, are very rough on other parts of the body. So we're looking at the possibility of other immunological agents that would block the rejection process. These are projects that will be definitely slowed.
Many stray dogs wind up in humane societies across the country. Kathleen Hunter is the executive director of the Toronto Humane Society. She's opposed to the use of animals in experimental research and says you either take the position that animals have rights or that they're here to be used.
And I don't believe that they're here to be used. I think they have just as much of a justifiable right to live unmolested as we do.
But they are used, and as we saw earlier, used to further medical research. Hunter says some pet owners are concerned about their dogs winding up in research labs.
I think most people are justifiably concerned to think that a pound or a shelter, which is supposed to be a place where animals have some help and some concern on their behalf, have turned into places where they're a funnel, a conduit for the research community to find a cheap source of animals. And I'm sure that most members of the public who've ever owned an animal or you know, have enjoyed the company of an animal, even if it doesn't belong to them, would be very concerned to think about those former pets, very happy, sociable little animals ending up in a research lab.
The word pet implies that it is an active pet, that it's somebody, you know, loves it, it has a home environment, etc. The act is set so that we only get animals impounded under a bylaw. In other words, if people bring an animal into a municipal animal control for euthanasia, they're moving to an apartment or whatever reason, those dogs are not available to us. Absolutely. They have to be picked up as strays, they have to be held for a certain amount of time and determined that no one wants them. I submit this means that they are not pets. The animal rights people at this point, although most of them say we don't want any animals whatsoever used in research, the more moderates are saying we don't want the ones that are coming through animal control, we want you to breed your own. So now you're looking at an animal that by the time I bring in from, say, the city of Oshawa, transport it in, do the paperwork, clean the cage, vaccinate it, deworm it, deflea it, et cetera, is worth about $130. The alternative would be to purchase a dog at anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500, which means radically less research can be done with the funds available. It also means that 2 dogs die. The one in the pound is going to be euthanized and the one that we've bred specifically for the work. So now you're trading 2 lives for 1, which I think is even more immoral.
It's a very complex issue. In Ontario, the Provincial Animals for Research Act allows researchers to take stray dogs from pounds and shelters, and that access is regulated. The researchers can't obtain dogs from private sources. In other parts of the country they can, which means that strays there can be picked up at random and sold to research labs. We'd like to know what you think. Write to us. We'll give you our address at the end of the show.
If you're disabled and looking for a job, stay tuned.
As everyone knows, Joe, the recession is putting a lot of people out of work, which makes it that much more difficult for people with disabilities to find jobs. One organization here in Toronto that can help disabled job seekers is a consumer-run job agency called the Employment Connection. The Employment Connection opened for business on May 1st, 1990.
Yes, I'll put you through to one of our consultants. One moment, please.
Sponsored by the Innovations Program of Canada Employment and Immigration and the Municipality of Toronto, the mandate of the Employment Connection is to bring together job seekers with disabilities and employers.
What has happened to Naomi?
Working on a one-to-one basis, employment specialists offer expert advice to both. The help given by the specialists complement existing services and resources offered by government, community self-help organizations, and private sector companies. Sandra Borda, along with most of the people working for the Employment Connection, is disabled. She begins her meeting view with job seekers by telling them to make sure they are job ready.
The first thing, of course, is know what your skills are. What is marketable? If you need to take some extra training because you don't have a marketable skill, one needs to do that right away. Getting a top-notch resume put together that has all of the information required, as well as good visual presentation. This is what wins you the interview. The resume, as well as a very good covering letter. These are all tools for searching for jobs, but the tools need to be in good order.
How has things been stuck?
Roy Jones, who is visually impaired, says many disabled people have reason to feel bitterness because of job discrimination. But he cautions them not to show this when they go for an interview.
They shouldn't go griping of all the ills that society has done them or have befallen them, but rather where they are now and what they have to offer in a non-threatening way, in a non-violent, in a non-hostile way, looking at the assets, the pluses, the benefits that any company or prospective employee can gain from their presence, selling their skills.
Like many people, Sue Clifford McHenry knows what it's like to be disabled and unemployed. She tells her clients, if you can do it, I can do it. We asked her if job seekers should talk about their disability when they go for a job interview.
It's a choice that I feel that people have to make themselves. I don't go in and say, absolutely go talk about your disability if the individual has a lot of discomfort or uncomfort or part of their disability has caused them not to be in the workplace. But usually the rule of thumb is if you need special accommodations in the job, to be upfront, to be honest about what your needs are, and to know exactly what your needs are. Instead of going in and saying, well, maybe I need this, maybe I need that. Know what your needs are and communicate them very clearly.
Yes.
Cheryl Braithwaite reminds her job-seeking clients that the way a person dresses for a job interview could make or break one's chances.
Dress for success. You know, if you want to get that job, you have to present yourself in the best way possible. And I feel that they should make sure that they're clean and tidy. You know, if it's a job where they're going to be working in the mailroom, there's no need for them to wear a three-piece suit when they go in for an interview. But I think that they should make sure that they're clean and tidy and dressed appropriately for the work environment.
Going off to the first job interview can be a nerve-wracking experience. Let's face it, says employment specialist Sandra Borda, none of us looks forward to being grilled by a prospective employer, no matter how badly we want the job.
The interview is a very stressful situation. It's not a natural environment to be sitting there and being assessed and judged with every word that you speak. It's a very stressful situation. In order to sort of demystify it a bit, I feel there needs to be a lot of practice interviewing skills, a lot of reading. I think people should read books on it or chapters on it. There's all kinds of wonderful literature written on the interview process or the whole job search process. And I feel that the more knowledge you have, the better you can handle it. It will help your self-confidence. It's very easy to be discouraged, especially, as I say, in this job market where there are so many applicants for one job. It's very easy to be discouraged. I think you need to have, if possible, a kind of a support system. You know, friends, family, people. You need buoying up every once in a while during the whole process. I know I was unemployed on one occasion where it took me about 4 months to find a job, and I think the hardest thing to hang on to is your sense of self. You know, your self-esteem takes quite a beating during a time when you're not employed because our whole identity is tied up in what we do.
If you're in the Toronto area, the Employment Connection can be reached by calling 921-5592. There are other organizations that help people with disabilities find work. They include the Canada Employment and Immigration Commission, the Ontario March of Dimes, the Canadian Paraplegic Association, and the Canadian Hearing Society. Local branches should be able to give you advice if you're looking for work.
Coming up next, a dream come true. Catherine Steele has cerebral palsy. She recently completed her Ph.D. in biostatistics at the University of Toronto. She spent 15 years working towards her doctorate, and though she is humble about this achievement, it was no small feat. Dr. Steele told Joe how she got started.
I always enjoyed math. I could do a lot on the computers, and I could do a lot in my head. So one thing just led to another. And I enjoy medicine too, so I could do statistics and medicine at the same time.
What was the reaction from people at the university when you showed up for class?
They were very good. I was very, very lucky. I never had any trouble at all.
Any negative experiences?
Just one. The only professor I met was very mean.
Do I want to hear about it?
No, I started my very first year. I wanted to take astronomy, and he didn't think I could cope, so he went to the registrar and asked him to take me out of class. So I had to take chemistry instead.
What tempted you to go on and get your Ph.D.?
Well, after my master's, I found a job in the Department of Community Health and worked for a couple of very terrific professors for 4 or 5 years. I decided, since I was still at the university, that I might as well give a class at the Ph.D.
What was the one thing that kept you going?
Once I start something, it's very hard to get me to stop. I also had a terrific family who were pushing me. So I guess the two things together kept me going. I wish there were more disabled people in the academic community. I think a lot of people feel it's a handicap you shouldn't go too far. And I hope the attitudes will change one day.
Now, as you're walking up to the platform to get your doctorate, and they put the robe on and they give you the piece of paper, what did that feel like?
It was like a dream come true. I don't think I really thought I would ever get there, but it was wonderful when it was all over.
Dr. Steele claims her disability has never hindered her ability to get a job and is nothing but optimistic about future prospects. Right now, she's taking a long overdue holiday. And that's our show. I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin. We'll see you again next week. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. And our fax number is 416-975-5636.